But for now, we have to talk about another topic, and that's President Biden, something else Rick has talked a lot about. President Biden ramping up his re-election efforts this week. He's set to land in Chicago today to deliver a campaign-style speech on his economic vision, known to many as Bidenomics now. So what can voters expect to gain from the president's address? Let's bring in David Gura, his NPR business correspondent. Rick Newman, our Rick Newman, is still with us as well. And guys, this has been thus far a fairly tough sell on the part of the president. I was just seeing some early headlines that he says, maybe the much touted recession is not actually going to arrive. Dave, do you think that he makes a legitimate case here, and do you think voters are going to buy it?
I don't know that he's made it yet. I think he wants to. And what's interesting to me is how he has begun to embrace this term. I think it was just a week ago he was speaking to union workers in the Northeast and talking about how people call this Bidenomics. Where do they get that term? What's it mean? And clearly something's changed over the last few days where his strategists and communications advisors have said, Bidenomics, it's a good term. Let's try to put some meat on the bones of what it is. I'm eager to see what he says. I mean, there is this fascinating kind of binary between how the president sees the economy, understandably, and what we're hearing from the Fed chair, from he and his colleagues at the Fed, just about sort of what is happening, what might happen. We see the president here really embracing, of course, the steady job market that we've seen, which is such a bright spot in this economy overall. I'm curious how he goes beyond that in the comments that he delivers today to talk about sort of getting past, yes, this post-COVID recovery to something more concrete and something that, to your point, Julie, I think voters will be able to understand and to his hope, I think, be able to associate with him.
And so, David, that considered, will this move the dial or have any considerable type of impact in the calculus going into the end of this year and ahead of the general election season?
So there's a bit of a wish and a prayer here. I know you and others have talked about just sort of the likelihood of a recession, what that might look like. Of course, that's nothing that the president wants or wants anything to do with. I think the hope here is one principally of messaging, that he is going to be able to characterize or contextualize what he's done here in a way that will stick with voters. We haven't really heard the other side of that, sort of what his, what the eventual Republican opponent or what the group of Republicans have said is their kind of economic strategy going forward here. There have been a lot of attacks on sort of the White House's tack when it comes to the stimulus during COVID and what it's done since. Of course, student loans is a component part of that as well. And I think that the hope here is messaging, that the president will be able to sort of draw a bold underline beneath how well the economy is doing in so many ways, and voters will be able to acknowledge that and, again, associate it with him and the White House.
Rick, you want to jump in?
Sure. Biden, the question with this branding of Bidenomics is there something real and different here, or is this just his effort to claim some credit for what's going right in the economy? And I think there actually is a new and different thing that you could call Bidenomics, and it is more government intervention in the economy. This goes back to 3 bills Biden signed: the infrastructure bill in 2021, the CHIPS Act in 2022, and then the so-called Inflation Reduction Act also in 2022. We are now seeing the effect of those laws, which is a lot of government money that is now going into the economy in the form of incentives for investing in green energy. We're seeing a factory boom. There is new manufacturing coming online in semiconductors and other things relating to technology. So the question is this going to be good for the overall economy? There are some critics of this who say what this is doing, it's taking money out of the private sector and it's government spending that is going to generate a lower return than private sector spending would. But it is moving the needle. Some people call this state capitalism along the Chinese model. It's not quite that, but it is something different, and it is starting to have an effect. Whether this is going to matter to voters is another question, though.
Yeah, and it's a good question, one that I don't think we have the answer to. And then throw all of this, while we're talking about fiscal stimulus, we have monetary policy, obviously, going a little bit in the other direction. Dave, you've been monitoring what Fed Chair Powell has been saying over there in Portugal at this roundtable of central bank heavy hitters. And as usual, he's hedging, right? He's sort of saying, he's basically giving himself a lot of cover to do what he thinks the central bank needs to do.
Yeah, I'll give some credit to our former colleague, Sarah Eisen. He's trying to wrangle a bunch of cats here. These are some big names. And of course, everyone's perspective is different. And it is a treat to kind of see them all on stage together, and to the extent that they are kind of playing off each other, that's interesting to see. But yeah, Jay Powell is striking a very optimistic tone. He talked a bit about sort of what he characterized the last meeting as. It was funny. Sarah Eisen said, you're not talking about this as a pause. You're not talking about this as a skip. What do you call it? And he said, I call it maintaining the federal funds rate at its current level for this meeting. So a bit of wry humor there and literalism from the Fed chair. But he did talk a bit about the path going forward. And he said the Fed is going to sort of make decisions with a little more time between them. As you said, Julie, sort of noting what he's discussed. He's not opposed to doing rate increases back to back. He talked about the risk of a recession as well. I was struck by the way that he characterized that. He said it is a significant risk. It's not the expectation that he thinks is going to happen here, but he thinks it is a significant risk going beyond a hard landing to something worse than that. So, he's not wearing a necktie, which is something to be more relaxed.
I noticed that. Yeah, I like that. It's not. I don't think that's what he's wearing to a Dead show, Dave. I mean, to be clear,
right?
Well,
of course, yes. The tie-dye is in the carry-on.
We just learned that, for those of you who don't know, Fed Chair Jay Powell is a Grateful Dead fan. We just recently
lifelong fan.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the extracurriculars that the people need to know, that he is human and he does have some things to do on the side as well when not maintaining the current Fed funds rate as well. David, while we have you, you think largely about, of course, what this consortium of governors actually means, and they're speaking for a body of other governors that have gone out, and there's a ton of Fed speak that we have to evaluate on a speech-by-speech basis or appearance-by-appearance basis. But they're also all concerned about how the market is digesting that. Is the market actually kind of not manipulating, but is the market almost kind of wagging the Fed in a certain direction?
That's a great question. They wouldn't bite at Sarah's questions about that directly. I think what we are seeing is them acknowledging the fact that inflation is obviously a huge issue for all of these economies. And it was interesting. There was an attempt to sort of get them to talk about each other's policies, and they demurred. But they did say that they talk to each other a lot. They're not kind of setting policy in concert, of course, or working through consultation in that way. But they said sort of in recognition of the fact that this is such a huge issue, a huge global issue, they feel the need to talk to each other and talk about what they've experienced and how things are going. But the market disconnect that you're talking about is a real one. I do think that there is a bit of that wagging. And as somebody like you who covers movement in the stock market day in and day out, it can be flummoxing and perplexing to see how, these utterances can cause huge change. Yes, I was talking about what the Fed chair was saying about the prospects of a recession or what rate hikes might be. This is kind of like variation on a theme. Yes, he's saying something that has some semantic difference, but it's largely in line with what he's saying before. And we are seeing markets, I think, get or have seen markets kind of get ahead of the Fed here many times in the last few months.
Rick, I can hear you moving to the end of your seat cushion. You want to jump in?
As shell-shocked as we are with regard to inflation here, I mean, this is kind of amazing to me. I mean, the inflation rate here is now down to 4%. It's over 6% in Europe. And in the UK, it's 8.7%. I mean, imagine if we still had inflation around 9% in the United States. I mean, Biden's approval rating would probably be at 20% instead of the low 40s. So we're getting better here in the United States. But one thing I think we kind of forget is all those price increases that we've had over the last year and a half are still there. The rate of increase is slowing. But for the things that have gone up in price, those prices we really have not seen any prices coming down. We've just seen the rate of increase going up. So I think that might be one of the things that explains why voters remain sour on the economy and sour on Biden's handling of the economy, even though inflation is getting better, which is they're still kind of choking on the price increases we've already had.
Rick, David, really solid analysis here this morning. David Gura, NPR business correspondent, as well as Yahoo Finance's own Rick Newman. Thanks so much, guys.